Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is wade. Let's take a look at the definition of this verb. The main way that we use this verb wade is to mean to walk with effort through water. So here we're going to think not of just like a little puddle, but somebody who's going into water up into maybe their knees or even their waist. Now, if we're talking about water that's up to our neck or head, right, that's too much. That's at that point we're going to begin swimming. Uh, but again, with lower amounts or less quantity of water there, anytime we're trying to kind of walk through it, that's the proper verb to use. You should know that wade is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, we need to drop the E and then add ing to form wading. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by just adding D, since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, wade, ends in a D sound. So our past tense ending is going to make an id sound, and we're going to add an extra syllable as we say it. It should sound like this: waited, waited. Okay. Now, there are a couple phrasal verbs that are actually pretty common to hear. Both, I guess you'll hear people use it, but then also I feel like I see it a lot as I read newspaper articles, magazine articles, etc. So we're going to look at those today. The first phrasal verb is to wade in or wade into, and it really means that someone is getting involved in something. Right? So they're sort of actively making a decision to participate in something. An example might be, are you wading into our argument? Right? So we can imagine two people are having some kind of a disagreement, and now a third person starts to get involved. Maybe that person thinks they can help resolve it, but again, they're not just letting that disagreement occur between two people. Now we have a third person. The second phrasal verb that's pretty common to both see and hear is to wade through. So sometimes we're using it to mean that we're reading something that's maybe really long or complex, but it could also mean that we're moving through something. So like a project, and again, we're doing it with maybe a lot of difficulty. It's taking a lot of time, something of that nature. So an example here: she's been wading through 50 years of her grandma's diary. Right? So some people are really good about writing down things that are happening in their lives, right? A diary. And then sometimes those get passed down to someone, in this case, maybe a grandson or granddaughter, and now they're reading through, and we can imagine this would be a lot of material. And maybe because it's handwritten, maybe it's harder to read. That could be something that's making it difficult. Now let's practice using our verb of the day, wade, in the simple present and the present perfect. We're going to start with the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about actions that are our habits or our routines. We also use it to describe facts. And the thing about the simple present affirmative is that we need to pay attention to our verb. If our sorry, we need to pay attention to our subject. So the verb has to match the subject. My apologies. So if my subject is I, you, we, or they, then I'm just going to use this base verb, and you can see that in my example here. Professors wade through tons of papers and projects at the end of the semester. So a lot of teachers out there know this feeling of having to move through a large quantity of written work or production so that they can provide grades to their students. So here, my subject professors is plural, it's like they, but if I was talking about one professor and his habit or her habit of moving through something, then what I would do is add an S to the end of the verb, right? And I would say, the professor wades, with an S there. Okay, so we're going to add that S anytime our subject is a he, she, or it. Now let's talk about making negative simple present sentences. To do this, again, we must pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, our structure is going to be do, not, and then the base verb. Or you might hear the contraction don't, and then the base verb. And again, if the subject is he, she, or it, we'll use does not or doesn't, and then the base verb. Here's another example sentence. Most presidents don't wade into intra-party fights. Okay? I saw this sentence recently in something I was reading. We see wade into a lot in discussions or articles about politics. And again, it's sort of that idea of getting involved in something. So here, what it's saying, if we have a president who's a member of the Democratic Party, and there are two groups of Democrats having some sort of disagreement, the habit or the routine is for that president to not get involved. They don't wade into. Now let's look at making yes or no questions. To do this, our structure is going to be do or does, then we're going to have our subject, and then the base verb. So I always like to point out to students, notice the only time I'm adding an S to the end of this verb is when I'm in the affirmative and my subject is he, she, or it. So here's a yes or no example. Does this dress wade into prom territory? So I heard someone say something like this, or something about a bit similar, wanting to know if they were looking too much like they were going to a high school formal dance, a prom, right? So they didn't want to get too close to that particular sort of style of dress. Now let's take a look at the present perfect. The two P's in this verb tense help me remember that I need two parts to make an affirmative sentence. So I'm, again, going to pay attention to my subject. If my subject is I, you, we, or they, I'll use have. And then I'm going to use the participle form of the verb. And here, since this is a regular verb, the participle is the past tense form. But if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use has and then the participle form of the verb. Let's take a look at our first example here. The company has waded into many new industries over the year. So we can imagine a business is started, right? And there's sort of one thing they focus on, but then they start to get involved in other industries, right? So other types of business. Now, if I want to make a negative present perfect sentence, I'm going to do that. Again, I'm going to pay attention to my subject, then I'll use have or has, then not, and then the participle form of the verb. An example, they haven't waded through all the data. So here, they haven't made it all the way through maybe a really difficult project, a lot of information to try and sort of process and understand. Let's look at making a yes or no question now. To do this, again, I start with have or has, whichever form matches our subject. Subject comes next, then the participle form of the verb. Here's an example. Have you waded into the ocean yet? Right? So here, this goes back to our first or primary definition of the verb. Have you started to sort of walk into the ocean, maybe to the point it's kind of at your lower leg or your knee? Some people don't enjoy swimming, right? So they might like to just kind of wade in, sort of get the lower part of their body wet, but not feel sort of out of control. Now, with this present perfect verb tense, we're many times using this to describe something that happened in the present and is continuing, happened in the past, continuing into the present. Or we might use it to describe something that happened at some unknown point in the past. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb wade. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So, same spelling, same pronunciation. When we use this word as a noun, though, all we're referring to is sort of the act of wading, the act of going into water of some depth in order to be able to walk. So, an example, uh, don't think you hear the noun all that commonly, but it might be something like this. Let's go for a wade in the creek, right? So they maybe want to take their shoes off, kind of walk, get their feet wet, get their legs wet. That's the idea here. Another word you might hear is the noun waders. So this can either refer to some tall waterproof boots or some garments that are also waterproof that's going to cover your legs, maybe even kind of come up past your stomach. So I've included a picture here. You can see in this photo a man who's fishing, right? He's standing what seems like maybe in the middle of a river or it seems like a really large stream or creek, but who knows? And this person is wearing waders, so we can kind of see boots and pants, and they're meant to keep his clothes underneath dry. So, an example of how you might hear this: should I wear waders on the fishing trip? Right? And I think this would be a pretty common word to hear if you're interested in fishing. Many fishermen and fisherwomen decide to wear those with certain types of fishing. The last word we're going to look at today is the adjective waitable. And as I looked at this word, I saw two different spellings for it. The most common one I saw dropped the E before adding the suffix able, but you can find some instances where it's where the E on the end is kept before adding that suffix. So the suffix able generally means able to, and you can see that in our definition here. If we're describing something as being waitable, it's able to be sort of walked across. Okay, so what it really means is like the water's not going to get so high that you can't walk across it. An example of this: the stream is wadable in the summer and fall. Okay, so spring here in the United States tends to be very wet, so maybe the water gets too high. And so that's not a good time to try and wade across the stream. Wait for the summer or the fall. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.